They say marketing is a madman's game. So now we turned it over to the Marketing Madmen with Nick Constantino and Trip Job on Extra 106.3 FM.
Happy Saturday. Welcome to the Marketing Madmen. Trip Job and Nick Constantino here with you again. And we're going to have some fun today. You know, a while back, you kind of led the talk on politics, and I didn't get as much chance to jump in, which was probably a good thing. But I'm excited today to maybe get to share some of my views and see. You know, I think I've had the longest reign of seeing how politics are marketed than anyone in this room. I might have voted in more elections than the two of you combined.
Yeah, well, that's fair. That's fair. But you know what? At the pace of change, what you did in the 80s probably doesn't matter. Let's be honest. And how fast things have changed. And I think that's what we're going to talk a lot about today. Exactly. So to set it up, we have Miss JANELLE King here. And JANELLE, we're going to make this announcement now because the timing is just, I guess, right. JANELLE has her podcast, Let's Talk About It, but that is going to also move to the slot after ours on the radio show. So the timing is absolutely perfect. We're very excited to have you. And you know, we're going to talk about a whole bunch of different things, but we're really going to start with what you've learned through both yourself and Kelvin and his run. Let's go right into it. Let's save the introductions for the end, as it'll segue nicely to the show, and let's go into it. Yeah. You saw a political campaign run before your very eyes. You saw the back end of it, the front end of it. You were an outsider looking in, but you were also an insider looking out. Yeah. What did you learn? You know what? I learned a lot, but I have to say that, you know, making the decision to run for office is a process within itself. And it starts before you even bring on a consultant, right? So when we were at home and we were talking about this, the first thing we did when we whiteboarded, you know, is it going to take to defeat Raphael Warnock? And we knew this was going to be a unique race. So that's what we did. And when we whiteboarded it, we didn't have a person in mind. Wow. And so we just wanted to make sure we had everything there. And as I was going through it, we were like, oh my God, we're going to need these things. And I looked at Kelvin and I'm like, I think this is you. Like, this describes you. And so he's like, oh, man, you know, I guess I'm up.
They'll ultimately talk a lot about it. You developed a strategy and then you figured out the tactics. And Kelvin was one of the tactics.
And whiteboarding is such a marketing term. I mean, that's, it's called the Marketing Madmen. But in Madmen, how many times do they start with a whiteboard and a storyboard and then you develop it out? So, you know, I have to imagine as you think about that marketing message may not be clear to begin, but as you develop and think more who the person is that Kelvin is going after and you guys were reaching, that marketing message becomes more and more apparent and pops out as you go.
Yes, absolutely. To your point, you know, we're business people. So, you know, and Kelvin's 100% business. Yeah. He did not have the political background like I had. So in his mind, everything has to be business focused. I mean, even when we ran the campaign, I mean, we were able to manage our budget down to a T, you know, because we were very, very business focused. You have to have a good marketing plan. I think that's part of the thing. One of the things we learned about on the trail is that particularly when it comes to politics, and we were in the primary because, you know, we calculated Herschel Walker coming in and we had a strategy for that too. And we figured that he would kind of come in and we knew he would suck up all the energy, suck up the donors because of his name recognition. So we were like, what do you do? Do you get out? Do you stay in? If you stay in, what's your strategy? Right. So that's what we did. Right. And we were like, the strategy is to continue to stay in the game, continue to move things forward, because at the end of the day, we all got to kind of, you know, push this across the finish line. But the number one thing we learned is that when it comes to marketing in general, when it comes in politics, is that we don't know our audience. We think we do. So in the primary, marketing to Republicans is one thing. Marketing to the GOP is something totally different.
I love that.
You know?
I love that. So, I love that statement. Yeah. And one of the reasons, and we talked about this with Cody Hall a lot, was, you know, modeling is based on previous data. The data moves at a faster pace now than it ever has before. So all those things and all the modeling that they were talking about, you know, when Stacey Abrams came in and the way she was doing her ground game and the money they committed to paying for that ground game for the first time was what threw this whole thing off. So I have to imagine COVID threw a lot of this off, but the pace of change makes it even harder to know who you are marketing towards, because those old data sources are old, and then the party changes quickly, and people are moving here at such a fast clip that you know you talk about it. But the process of Alpharetta, how much has Alpharetta as a county changed and the city changed in the past 10 years, and Cobb County? So I have to imagine
the stakeholders. I mean, that's kind of what I'm hearing with the GOP. It's, you know, it's not that you didn't understand the GOP, but the power.
And their
the
motivations.
stakeholders there.
Yeah, you know what? It's interesting because I grew up in the GOP, right? I was interning all the way through becoming the deputy state director of the Georgia Republican Party. And in doing that, I had one look. I saw the GOP as the nucleus of the Republican Party in Georgia, right?
Sure.
But now I have a bit of a different take on it. Because when we go to these meetings and you have about 50 people there, and you think about there's 10 million people, a pool of voters, that it makes that little room look really, really small, right? And so just because you won, like for instance, I mean, Kelvin beat Herschel in a poll amongst the GOP.
Wow.
So that ought to tell you something.
And isn't it interesting, the motivations, right? Because the GOP as their whatever they are is probably very different than the representation of the voters in which that they do represent.
Very much
and
so
the
different.
motivations of who should win and why. And I have to bet that a lot of those people that are representing the GOP have been there for a very long time.
They have.
And the bureaucracy has settled in, and their decision-making process, I'm not saying it is altered or not clear anyway, but it is different than someone who's trying to get action quickly. That process is different, I'd have to imagine.
Well, I would say at one point, yes, they have been there for a very long time. But then we had President Trump's era come in. And now we have a lot of we have the Trumplicans is what I call them, who are the new conservatives that kind of came in, who were just a Democrat yesterday in some cases.
Wow.
Some were, a lot of them had never voted before. And I praise Kellyanne Conway for this because she found a group of voters that, were under, represented. It was typically in the low income white communities where they just felt like, well, I don't vote, I don't participate, I'm not seen.
They needed a
and
champion.
She gave them a
it was
platform.
kind of that
They
Rust
needed a
Belt.
champion. They needed someone to represent them.
Which was a great marketing plan.
Man, if you could find those spots, those pockets of people that are underrepresented and are looking for that champion and that leader, man, those are loyal folks for a long time.
Yeah, and I think you hit on a couple of things, and the difficulty I think with marketing politics versus marketing your business is politics is a zero-sum game. Yeah. So you can do the right things. You can know that the big, competitor, Herschel or whomever, is going to come in and take some. The problem is if you're a business, if you find that right niche, you can still probably coexist. Yeah. With the primary, guess what? It's one or none.
It's one or none. And to your point, it's like I was saying, that poll that showed that Kelvin beat Herschel within the GOP, right? Those are the people that are the most highly engaged. But then I remember we went to another county and we were at a fair. And the GOP had a table at that county GOP had a table. And people that were walking up were not people who attend GOP meetings. And they were grabbing a Herschel sign, and they didn't know who Kelvin was, right? Because obviously, it takes a lot reach. Anyway, when Kelvin would talk to them, they were like, oh, yeah, I really like you. And then we'll ask, well, why are you supporting Herschel? And they were like, oh, because I know him. And we weren't offended. We were not offended because we understand that does play a factor. That's part of marketing,
reality,
right? It's the reality of it, and you can't overcome that in some way.
And that's always been part of marketing. That's always been part of politics, right? Yep. You're talking. Let's go Reagan. I mean, you're talking. You're voting for people that you can talk about any of these guys, really. Yeah. But I'm curious. When you saw that kind of manifest itself, right? One of the things we always do is we get comfortable in our own circle, and we only think about things through the guise of your circle. How did you separate yourself from that and look from that outside in and say, oh my goodness, we have to go get these people. How do these people know? You know
what? It's interesting. So we didn't. We stayed the course. One of the things that Kelvin said, you don't deviate from the plan. So even when you realize that something, if it's catastrophic, right? But there was no way we were going to be able to reroute the plan in order to overcome this what we saw, right? So, but he's about running through the finish line, right? You stay, you run through the finish line, and now we are seeing residual because there's so many people that are messaging him. Now, obviously, we didn't know the outcome was going to. Well, I can't say we didn't know the outcome. That wouldn't be true. We did know. I mean, we were telling people we didn't think Herschel would be able to beat Raphael Warnock, but now that happened, we're getting so much information. Right. People are contacting Kelvin like, well, who is this? And people started, even in the general, people started researching all the other candidates.
Right.
When they saw it coming,
And while you wanted to win in year one, the reality is this may be a 5 or 9 year race.
Exactly.
Well, and now all those people become organic supporters. And there's a difference between paying for and campaigning towards people and having them become organic supporters. And one of the things I think so important to what you said, especially about marketing, stay the course. If you keep altering and you keep changing, then the problem is that if you market for 6 months, say, and then all of a sudden you stop, you might see those effects 3 months down the road, just like you're seeing now. So by staying the course and being consistent, you're seeing residual effects that had you changed, you might not even have been seeing, which is very similar to marketing and what we preach on this show.
Well, discipline and patience, right?
Yeah.
That's key. I mean, it's key. If you want to produce any type of outcome, you better have some discipline and patience, and you cannot set your end goal date.
Which is so hard nowadays. It's so hard nowadays. One of the things Cody was talking about was it has become the biggest circus act of the primaries is who gets the most attention, who goes, which has actually hindered parties moving forward because they spent all their resources and time on this dog and pony show for the primaries that when you actually have to go for the election, people are so divided and so broken up that it becomes harder to win the actual election. So what did you see? What was, obviously the different parties and everyone had their own style, but what did you see? Were people themselves or were they playing a character they thought they had to be? How did that look?
Oh, yes. Okay, so I'm known for, I just keep it real. I don't know how not to.
I wouldn't have asked you the question if I didn't expect a good answer.
Because I don't know. I don't really have good, short-term memory. So if I'm lying about something, I'm not going to remember it. So I gotta keep it real. I do believe that there are people who are playing this game. I hate to see it, but I do see it. I hear people saying things that I don't think they actually believe in. I've had people come up to us and say, you know what, we actually voted for you, but I can't tell anybody. I mean, there was just so many things that I'm hearing, and it's really hard to listen to because you know that they are that they want to eventually be comfortable, and eventually you will. That's the part I'm trying to tell. The more you walk around as an imposter, eventually your real self will come out, and it's not going to be pretty.
Well, as I teased earlier, I said obviously I've had more elections that I voted for. As I get in this stage of my life, I mean, just there is a freedom in being much more transparent and open.
Yes.
And I see that in all my life, whether it's business, whether it's my personal, whether it's my family, coaching, et cetera. And I think it applies to politics. But let's face it, we're all biased. We all have influences. We all worry about what other people think. When you get to be 56 like I am, it's, it is freer to speak your mind. But when you're on the public stage, some people don't have that courage to do that, and I think that's something that when we come back from the break, we'll dive into that about how can politicians market better and how can they be maybe true to themselves. And I think it's an interesting topic. So you're listening to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3, and we'll be right back.
Now back to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3 FM.
Welcome back to the Marketing Madmen. Trip Job and Nick Constantino here with JANELLE King, and we are talking about marketing and politics. And right before the break, we were talking a little bit about, what can politicians do better as far as marketing. We talked a little bit about Kelvin's.
How much time do we have?
Well, we do have 23 minutes, so we're okay. It's better than the 30 seconds that we get from most politicians.
True.
And I know we're going to get into that. How do you distill real thought leadership when everyone is looking at 30-second ads? But let's say that maybe in the middle of this segment. Yeah. Let's maybe the first thing. What do you think? Politicians today, and you've seen it over the last 20 years or so, how has it changed, and what do you think we need to do better?
So, I mean, I think that messaging is the number one thing on both sides of the aisle, right? That's really what we're battling. We're not battling policy anymore. That's really how it's changed, is that we're not talking about policy. We're not talking about, how we can actually, solutions. We're talking about personalities, and we're talking about, just competing in messaging. So
simple messaging.
I
look at it like a basketball game. Like the crowd wants to remember the cheers.
Yeah.
Like let's go team is the cheer they do because everyone can get involved in it. So it is almost like keeping it simple and repeatable. It's become that, which goes against the thought leadership we're talking about.
Yeah,
right?
When I go to the Atlanta United game, I'm lost. Not in the game. The cheers, I'm lost because I'm not a supporter. And
to your point, I realize this on my social media, right? So I normally post about a minute of a clip sometimes. But I did 17 seconds the other day just to see what would happen, and it's gotten the most, views than anything else, and it's only 17 seconds. And I'm like, how do you learn anything? Anyway, but to your point, I think the Republicans and Democrats have two different things they need to overcome. On the Republican side, when it comes to messaging, we need to stop talking over people's heads. And what I mean by that is, I don't mean that like we're saying something that's so ultimately intellectual. What I mean is that most people have their heads down right now. Right. They're trying to figure out how they can make ends meet. I read an article that Fox put out that talked about people having to decide whether or not they're going to get dog food or they have to get rid of their animals because of inflation. They're not talking about the climate. God bless it, but they're not talking about January 6th. They're not talking about any of the stuff that we're talking about. We've got to stop doing that, right? And just start talking to that 45% of independents. And then on the left, their issue is I need them to allow us to compete. Let's actually compete.
Yeah.
Don't I have this joke. I don't know if our Gen Zers are going to know who I'm talking about, but I'm like, don't Tanya Harding me. Do not, do not cut me off at the knees. Do not block my stuff. Don't shadow ban me. Just compete. Let's do it. Let's go at it.
And that's when ultimately everybody wins. And like you look at free market anywhere. Me and my wife, she does international development, and we talk all the time. And she goes, "How do you fix China?" I go, "China's fixing itself." And the reason why is because there's a middle class. And whenever you have an emergent middle class, capitalism is what frees it. How do women get rights? They go to the workforce, and then you become Korea has a higher workforce of female population. I mean, at its core, the free markets exist, and capitalism exists for a reason. Now, both parties take advantage to their own extent, right? They're both going to take advantage of it. But at its core, that free market, if utilized the right way and not manipulated, will always bring positive change to people. Now, will it bring more? Well, don't even start with that, because there's many podcasts about Adam Smith, because he was actually, in everything he said, he was about the moral compass of man. He was actually a psychologist, and he talked as much about top-down economics as he did saving the guy on the bottom. So that is a huge debatable topic, and shoot, we're going to do a whole episode on that. Because both parties
maybe
use Adam Smith to their advantage.
JANELLE will do it and bring us on.
Both parties use Adam Smith to their advantage for the wrong reasons.
Well,
and
that's what politics does.
There's a whole
right?
Chicago School of Economics. The University of Chicago School of Economics screwed Adam Smith up for the country the way they spoke about him and what he did. We'll save that for another time. You threw me off guard. But those free market economies, I agree with. Now, that being said, so let's talk about messaging, because the messaging is important. So they're marketers, right? Yeah. You're marketing your party, yourself. You're marketing to a federal base, a state base, many different levels here. Yeah. So let's start with federal, okay? What do politicians themselves have to do to market themselves better to their own parties? And let's keep it broad, but you have the experience to speak to their own parties.
Tell the truth. Just tell the truth, right? Don't sugarcoat it. Don't try to wrap it up in a political message. Don't try to tell people that this is what you think we should mean. Just tell the truth. Give me the truth, right? If I don't like this person for whatever reason, I don't like this person. That's what I believe our younger generation's craving, right? Is that they don't want to be parented. And that's what we're seeing happen. I don't want to be parented. I'm a Zennial, I'm a little bit in the mix, a little bit of a Gen Xer, a little bit of millennial, but I cannot stand feeling like I'm being parented. And when you have these big politicians saying, "Okay, I know what's best for you," that's where the messaging goes wrong. Just tell the truth, right? Just say it. I don't like this. I mean, I agree with Trump here. I hate when he does this. I think he's crazy when he does this. And then people will at least respect authenticity. Authenticity.
Are they prepared
I think
for it,
authenticity, one of the tough things with politics is, look, I have changed my opinions on a lot of things in life, especially the more debate you have.
Right.
But in politics, we go back to, but he voted this way or she voted this way 6 years ago. Now he's a flip-flopper. No, I'd rather have someone who's authentic and say, you know what, I got more information or things changed, and now here's why I feel this way. Yeah. But you almost never see that in politics.
Absolutely. I think the key is explaining how the transformation happened. Right. What was that transformation process? Because if not, you'll get like a Joe Biden who will, say something that's completely ridiculous or completely outlandish. And then you're like, wait a minute, just yesterday you said this. And he's like, okay, I changed my mind.
Yeah. And I think that's right. I mean, that's, within the course of
changing your mind and learning
within the course of a campaign.
Right.
Yeah. Look, you're not going to, if you're changing for messaging and politics only. But as someone who's been in, Congress or been in this Georgia, House and things like that, over time, I think you can. Hopefully, we're learned enough and open enough to evolve on certain things.
I'm going to go down a rabbit hole and counterpoint this one. I'm going to play devil's advocate here. So I consider myself at its core to be a libertarian. Okay, I want government out of my business. I know myself. I can make the best decisions for myself, my family, with anything that I want to do. Whether it be if I want to go take drugs and disappear for a weekend in the woods, then I can go do that because I'll come back to work on Monday. Whatever the case may be.
But you do that.
Well, whatever the case may be. But the point is that I unfortunately believe two things. One, that the majority of the population cannot be libertarian. authoritarians, that they do want to be told what to do.
Yep.
And I also believe that politicians prey on that for multiple reasons. If they have 80% of the electorate distracted with all these things, then they can do whatever they want to. And if until we get rid of term limits and have third parties, then it is about that sleight of hand to distract people bombastically, to distract from what's really going on. So if I was to continue down this, and I'm going to stop it because I could keep going, I also believe that the parties are much more in cahoots than people think, and that level of distraction exists for a reason, to keep their duopoly on what is going on, which again, if they were more honest and they were more, I also lastly believe that most people who you were targeting that can speak for themselves lean pretty towards the middle. They believe in fiscal conservative and social liberalism, and I believe that's where most people lie. If that was really the case, that itself would be your third party, and that would screw the other two, so they'll never let it happen.
And I also think you've been in the you've been in the GOP, and I truly believe, because I've seen it, going back to the 70s, and I think there are parts of the party where there are 3 or 4, whatever, in Congress that are all the way at the right end or the left end, and the GOP and the Democratic Party want that. They don't want everyone over there, but they want someone out there to set whatever that limit is, set that edge.
That's a good perspective. I happen to think, and it's kind of ties in two things. So I loved your going down that rabbit hole, because I'm with you 100%. Term limits has to happen, and I'm all for bringing back a third party, because it just creates natural competition, and we need that competition. Which is why I think that Joe Manchin is a dark horse, and I'm going to keep saying that. If he jumps in this presidential race, he's a dark horse, and it's going to be a problem, because, like I said, 45% of Americans identify as independent. They're going to naturally look at what he's saying, and then if he starts to sound like he's sounding normal, then he may actually pull this off. I mean, I'm telling you, it's going to be a problem.
My only concern would be, and this is just me being ignorant and a New Yorker who thinks less of other people, having somebody from West Virginia run this country is terrifying to me. And I'm just going to call it what it is. And mostly, and I say that
we had someone from Arkansas.
You do realize most Americans are not going to know where he's from.
That's not why I'm saying it. So I like where you're headed, and that's not what I'm saying. I am saying that he's so tied to the coal industries and what the industry is in West Virginia that I think he speaks more on behalf of a part of the country that has been diminished already. That's why I say it. It has nothing to do with the people from West Virginia. No way.
No one's going to know that.
Really?
No, majority of America. I know my generation. I didn't even when you said West Virginia, I was like, wait, what? I forgot. I mean, it's not even a thing. I can't even tell you where other presidents are from.
And I'm not even a political person.
I don't know if you did a poll of where most of the coal is mined in the country, I would bet you'd have 20% or less of people answer it that know where coal is mined.
Right.
Okay, well, how about we did this? How about we found out where all his campaign money comes from? If you saw where all his campaign money come from, would that make it easier to know?
Yeah.
Well, how do you find that out?
Oh, you can't.
Do you see what I'm saying? So that's the thing. It's really interesting. So but to your point about people wanting to be told what to do, right? I thought that up until recently. Now I think people just want to be comfortable. So it's more so like, I don't want you to tell me what to do, which is why I have a libertarian streak for sure, because I am 100% get out of my business and I don't want to be in yours. But at the same time, if everyone is personal responsibility does limit comfort, because now you're responsible for making your own comfort, and that's a lot of work.
But it is. But isn't it more comfortable to know that rests in your hands than somebody else's? Isn't
only
it more
if you have it
to know that ultimately? I'll tell you this: I have many times I'm shooting this video right now because I didn't want to rely on someone else to do it. I learned how to edit video. Right. I'm building a deck in my backyard because I didn't want to pay someone $20,000 to build a deck.
Because you're a libertarian.
But isn't there comfort in that, knowing that?
But for 30 years, I've heard the debate about Social Security and Social Security going to run out. So I made the decision very early in my business career that I was going to fund my own retirement. Yeah. All right. Whether I knew it was a political mess. And so guess what? I just assumed there'd be nothing left for me by the time I got to that age. And so, yes, I took control myself. And if I get it, great. It's a nice, small little windfall.
Yeah.
But can we?
That's independent. That's taking it into your own hands. And I think, again, I would prefer if the politicians spoke to those people. I just don't believe it's ever going to happen.
You know what? It's going to happen with us. So Kelvin and I started Let's Win for America Action because we were tired of listening to bad messaging to non-traditional conservative voters. Yeah. We were so over it. It's not just minority voters, but it's just people who, like young people, right? I mean, I wouldn't want to join this party either if I was listening to some of the stuff stuff that we're talking about, right?
Either party.
I mean,
you wouldn't want to join either party if you listen to it. It has nothing to do with you.
No one cares. No one cares about any of that stuff, right?
I just want to vote for the best person. And, people ask me I said, I'll vote for the best person. I've probably for the last 12 years not voted straight line party. And I probably won't ever
fine.
again.
That's not a bad thing, man. That's not a bad. That's not a bad thing.
No, I mean, it's
we're
okay.
not going to shun you, and I'm not going to call you out.
Because guess what? Both parties have bad candidates, and both parties have some good candidates.
So great segue here. Okay, so how do the parties reach across the aisle? Okay, so we talked about how, as a Republican, you would market to a Republican, a Democrat, Republican. How do they go across the aisle? How do Republicans bring that conservative message of more, fiscal conservative? How do you get that across? How do we get the other people to go on the side? Because ultimately, that middle is those people who are the most likely to flip to the other side, right? Yeah. You're not going to get a Green New Deal person to go over to the Conservative Party, and you're not going to get a Trumper to go over to that side. That's not going to happen. That middle of the bell curve is where this is going to happen. Right. So what do we do? How do you market better to the other party?
I say number one, we got to stop marketing to the bookends of everything.
Right.
And then, so that's number one. And then number two, I say we need to trash political data and bring in consumer data. Like, pay attention to what the consumers are consuming, because that's what you're putting in. Whenever I post something on social media, you're not posting it to the political points, the political voters. You're posting it to consumers.
Give me an example of consumer data. Like, what are you talking about? You're talking about like CPI, consumer price index numbers. What kind of data are we talking about?
So, for instance, right, we're like, let's talk about Gen Zers, right? Gen Zers care a lot about, and we actually talked about this on another radio show, that they care a lot about what's happening in the world and feeling like they have a purpose and feeling impactful in the world, right? Yeah. So that's consumer data. Politicians won't know that. They're not going to know that, right? They're going to look at, what they're clicking on is, mental health issues. So we need to talk about mental health.
But it's a great point. But because if you look at like shoe companies, modern shoe companies, they're all putting sustainability and all those things. Yes. That's consumer data. Yes. If you paid attention to those little trends, you could probably craft a good political message. Right. And you're also ceding some power to the corporate machine by not talking about that.
Right. Yeah. So we're going to talk about, like, for instance, so if with Kelvin and I, we're going to be putting out short videos and things, but one of the things we're going to eventually talk about is equality versus equity, but how it's sustainable, which is the sustainable option. Because if you're all about really sustaining America, then why don't you hear what's the sustainable option when it comes to working with people in minority groups, and how do we close the wealth gap and all that stuff? We got to teach it, and we got to speak the language of the consumer and not the politician.
And we have to do it for a long enough time. It's not going to happen in 30-second blips. I mean, you start that way, but it's got to do it over and over and over again.
Well, we have to, I mean, right now, I think they said on average we're at a 3-minute attention span. So,
on a good
so we
day.
kind of have to do it kind of quickly. But I must say that I do think that Democrats have jumped on the consumer part of this much faster and sooner than us.
And I will say, from what I understand, one of the problems is that Republicans, conservatives lean on economic data, like economists, which is, again, you're talking about speaking over someone's head.
Right.
I mean, raise your hand if you passed economics, because I don't know a single person.
That's my major.
66 was the average score.
I have a feeling that you passed it.
I was an economics major. So,
66 was the average score, and I got an A all the time. I mean, but what I'm saying
I got
is,
a C.
If you look at talk about speaking over someone's head, economics is one of those things that is over everyone's head. And it's not looking at CPI and the economics data. It's looking at trends and consumer trends and trying to get ahead of a consumer trend.
Right, you're forecasting.
I joked. Another thing I joked with Cody was when I knew politics had changed is when I saw Obama's ad in a video game. Yeah. Just think about it. You want to talk about consumer trends? Well, 60 million people are playing video games. You just got a free billboard in there. Yeah. There's got to be something there. That is consumer trends. And I would agree with you that the Democratic Party has done a better job of applying those trends and capitalizing those trends.
So how do you decide, you think, what's going to be the most important? So consumer trends, we can talk about, what's the economy doing for me? That's one. All right. We talked a little bit about equality versus equity. I love that kind of dynamic. I think a lot about the last year, and it did come into some of the election, is, let's just call it community safety. Whether you want to get into the police aspect of it or in the governing aspect, but the general
don't
part
don't even start me on this one. Don't even start me on this one.
And
do you
then
know how
the
safe
abortion.
we are? Do you know how safe we are right now in this country? Do you know how safe we are? I was brought up in Queens in the 80s. Do you know what the murder rate in Queens was in the 80s? Do you know the gang violence, the things I saw in my life? We are so safe as a whole right now. How have we been led to believe that we are unsafer now than we were than growing up? I would ride my bike in Queens to get pizza at 6 years old by myself to buy pizza when the thing was a disaster. Now every kid is so sheltered. How are we led to believe we're more...
Because of YouTube, because of the media, because of... all these things.
Well, I mean, our crime is no longer isolated. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the biggest issue, right? I mean, crime used to be isolated to and relegated to communities where there was low income. And it kind of stayed there and it lived in that space. But now when you have crime creeping into Buckhead, now we're unsafe. Like this is a problem, right? And I agree. I think it is a problem. I think it's here's the thing, back to being my libertarian streak. If you want to kill yourselves in your own community, that is your choice. Right. That is a decision that you have made. And if you don't want to be in that community, you can leave and go to another community. That's the way it used to be.
That's the ability.
But it's not like that now.
Right. And I grew up in North Carolina in the 70s. I got bused in 3rd and 4th grade. So this was desegregation. So as a kid, I'm 7, 8, 9 years old. It didn't mean anything to me except I had a 40-minute bus ride across town.
Wow.
But and so I learned a lot. I got a lot of, which I think is great, learnings. But to your point, there were a lot of people who, we'll live in this part of town, and we were safe from what happened over there. Now, we were safe because it was during the day, 8 in the morning till 2 in the afternoon type of thing. But, I think now, yes.
It's a public topic now because of that.
It's crazy. You just said what you said about being bused in the 70s. I grew up in Queens. My only thing I know is you keep your head on a swivel and you walk around without making eye contact with anybody, but knowing what's going on around you. Yeah. And when we go in places that I actually feel safer in places that most people feel unsafe because that is what I was used to. Right. There are times where I go up and I'm in Milton and I see the antlers on cars and shotguns everywhere. I'm more nervous than I am in the middle of the hood just because of what you know. So seeing someone who is bossed at the end of back end of segregation towards it, to see someone who's grew in Queens, which the neighborhood I grew in had 230 languages spoken at one time. It was the most diverse place on earth. Shows the dynamic of why we're missing messaging.
Well, it also shows the growth of the country that we're ignoring, right? Because for some reason, we have people who want to act like we're still living in the 40s and the 50s. And I'm just like, we are not. Like, we are in 2023. Things are different now. You can share how you feel. You're not going to get rounded up. I mean, it's just like, let's stop doing this.
And the people that are here have babies, so even if you close all the borders, those people still multiply. Like, this is simple science stuff we learn. Like, those people multiply, so you can't stop changing the population. It will change itself.
Right, and to your point, and I didn't grow up in it, but I also was living in Long Beach, California during the Rodney King riots.
There you go.
So, again, another
LBC, baby.
Well, and that's when you started talking about that. I mean, I remember that time is for the next probably 2 months, you pulled up to a stoplight. You know how we all kind of look left, look right. No, everyone looks straight ahead.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that was just coming through that type of. At that point, that was a very traumatic national type issue, and I was right there in the middle of it. In fact, we had a liquor store burned down a block and a half away from our condo building. And stuff just all around.
Wow.
Being from New York, I'm interested to know your perspective on this. Would you say that there is that what we're dealing with now is that there's just a short fuse? Everyone has a shorter fuse, right? It's more senseless crimes on the rise now than there were.
My personal thought is we expect too much of our police, and that until we get mental health and some of these issues under wraps, we're asking our police officers to do too much, which send them in too many directions, and they should be reserved for the real crimes. And if they had the time to serve the real crimes, then we would be in a better state. So I think that that's a New York thing. I was there just like that. I was there when Times Square used to be all peep shows, and Giuliani came in and turned this into the utopia, if you will, that it is now. And it was all about police. It was stop and frisk. It was police, and that's what did it. So I was there for that, and I know the benefit that comes out of it. So don't get me wrong here. I am just saying that if we did not spend so much time on little issues and little things and expect our police force to be showing up at all these events, then maybe there'd be time to detract from the real crimes and criminals. And that is, I think, the problem. I think it used to be, if you joke about this, it sounds horrible, but like, if the kids with mental illness were treated differently. It was the kids you aimed at in dodgeball. I hate to say it, but like it was treated so differently, and like you did not require the time and effort towards everybody's problems that it is now, and it's about personal responsibility because we've absolved ourselves.
Well, the face of mental health has changed, right? I mean, mental health is no longer like back in the day. It used to be, mental health was like schizophrenia, and it was like these really big things, and depression was you were sad and you were in bed. But now depression looks like I'm going to go and hit you in the back of the head with a baseball bat because I think that you have more than what I had.
And we've given a voice to that also.
Absolutely.
We've given a voice to it manifest itself to become that, and they're not shunned anymore. And again, I always believe that when you have something underground, it festers and grows and grows till it explodes. And that was part of Ronnie King you talk about. That was
absolutely.
a festering
I think
of
with all
underground.
of us, I think that's the ability to communicate in general, that within our own self, if we don't get it out, if we don't communicate, we don't have good dialogue, right? And I think that goes back to a lot of what we're talking about. It's not talking down to someone or talking above them, parenting them. It's not screaming at someone else. It's letting good, honest dialogue get out, and let's have it back and forth. And maybe through that, we can actually work across the aisle and do something. So when we get to the final section here in a minute, I know we're going to talk a little bit about your show, but maybe we can hit on that and how we can do more across the aisle and together with politics. So you are listening to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3. We'll be right back.
Now back to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3 FM.
Welcome back to the Marketing Madmen. Trip Job and Nick Constantino and Janelle King here with you. And, we were just talking about in the break. Boy, that was an intense discussion. But, you think about it. You look at the three of us, okay? I am a white man in my mid-50s. Nick is, how would you describe yourself? You're multiracial, I guess. Multiracial in the 40s.
Sure. Tricky road you're going down.
And
racially ambiguous.
And Janelle is an African-American female that is in her late 30s. Yes. So, I mean, so already right there, there's a lot of just demographic differences. And yet we just had, I think it was a fantastic conversation with different perspectives. I learned something about both Janelle and Nick. I had no idea. And how do we do more of that, Janelle? I know your show's going to get into some of this, but what are your perspectives?
Yeah, I think it's being able to have these conversations without being emotional about it. I think a lot of people are just emotional about where they stand because we're all playing defense most of the time. But, the moment you relax that, I have to tell myself whenever I go into spaces where I know that I'm not necessarily the majority, or my perspective is not the majority, that I tell myself, Janelle, release the defenses, right? You don't have to battle people. Just say how you feel, and if they don't like it, oh well. But just release the defenses and then have the conversation. So I'm excited about the
It's not who screams loudest that wins. Right. That's one thing we have to get through our heads. Like usually, to smart people, who screams loudest loses because you're screaming because you don't know how to. And one last thing, we talked about mental health. So Janelle just said emotional. Okay. You should have emotion in everything you do.
Right.
Okay, I think that's another one of those stigmatized words. It'd be emotional, and usually, unfortunately, and this is because of my very feminist wife, she's taught me, it falls on women more. You're emotional. Well, what's wrong with showing emotion? Being passionate about someone, jumping out at something is important, but your emotions can't manifest themselves against somebody else. Your emotions should be towards somebody, in conjunction with somebody, not against somebody else, because those emotions also become the bat to the back of the head and all these terrible things. So emotion is incredibly important in everything we do in life. That is how you find passions and you love things, but your emotion is contained.
Oh, for sure.
Just like most times
you're not. It's a difference between, I'm a woman. I love that I'm emotional. I embrace it. As a conservative woman, I'm not a feminist at all, but I embrace it. And I'm like, I don't understand why we don't. However, it's a difference between being emotional and being emotionally led. And that's where it becomes a problem. Because when you're allowing your emotions to inform your decisions, then you're playing a dirty game.
So we did a perfect segue without even knowing it. And this sounds like a let's talk about a topic. So let's talk about it. So that is a perfect one, because that sounds like the type of topic that you would cover in the show. Yes. So for the listeners, the show has been a podcast on the Podcast Park and with Extra 106.3. Janelle has kicked so much booty that she has taken over the radio show right after ours. So after this show, you're going to go right into Let's Talk About It. So before we do that, Let's talk about it. Tell us about the show. Tell us about how you had on, and tell us the plans for now that you got this big time radio slot.
Oh man, I'm so excited. I'm so excited because so my podcast, the full episodes typically run pretty long. So the radio show is going to be a condensed version of all of my podcast. But the topics that I'm going to be talking about, I call these like the rabbit trails. So I look at the podcast as me establishing the core base of who I am, and that's kind of what I did last year. Going into this year, we're talking about topics that are on rabbit trails, right? So we're going to be talking about queer theory. We're going to be talking about just business topics. But this next show that you're going to be listening to is going to be talking about our rights. The Constitution, Bill of Rights, from a millennial perspective. Because I have questions. There's things I didn't know. I love listening to bloggers and people who talk about things from like TV shows and stuff like that. So the guest that I'm bringing on is someone who's he's a historian.
Got it.
And he knows a lot about the Constitution and Bill of Rights. But I want to know, what were they arguing about?
That's amazing.
Like, who was behind this?
Amazing.
What was their personality like? Were they drunk? Like, I have real questions.
Right. And why does something 250 years ago apply today?
Yes.
I love the topic.
Why do we need to know it?
I love the topic mostly because like we only pick 3 or 4 of the rights to talk about, and there are thousands of them. I mean, there's a Bill of Rights and there's a certain amount, but we talk about 2 or 3 that were like, well, freedom of speech, but like freedom of press, throw it in the garbage,
and right to bear arms. I mean, those are the 2 that come on more than anybody.
That's not even the Big Ten.
I know.
I mean, that's part of the Big Ten, but there's over 200 something plus amendments, right? Hundreds.
I know.
That's it. And I think just from this conversation and what I know about you, your goal is not to preach about this stuff. Your goal is to spark conversation from the guise of what you know and who you think needs to be spoken to give people a different way to think about things. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. I've been talking about this because it was such an eye-opening moment for me. But I talked to a young girl who was leaning Democrat, and she said to me that she didn't know that we were a constitutional republic. She had never even heard the term before. She just knew we were a democracy. And I was like, we're not a democracy.
Yeah.
That's the reason why we had the American Revolution. But we can get into all of that, right? Yeah. So I'm going to break that down in a way where my generation can understand, because a lot of times we talk about things and we use terms and like, what is ratification? I don't think most people know what that even means. How do you do it? So I mean, so I'm going to talk about
that means
stuff
we're
like
failing
that.
our kids in school. No offense, we're too distracted with teaching these kids stuff that they don't need to know, that they're not learning about. Those are things you learn in history and all the way through in social studies. I mean, my goodness.
When you have government class, I remember in high school, the kids had government, but half the time they were spending more time on foreign government.
Yeah.
And there's a point to understand the differences.
Oh,
yeah.
But we didn't spend enough time on the our government.
If you don't understand the British government, you'll never understand American government, because what we were left and what we fought against.
Right.
So I see both sides of it, but I do think that we are just teaching the wrong things. If most people don't even know what ratification is, we are in big trouble, because they're voting for the people that ratify those bills. And as the country gets bigger, the individual rights of people to be involved in the democracy are shrinking, not growing, because they're hiring people in theory to be their representatives who are ratifying said bills, and if they don't know what ratification is, we're screwed.
No.
And as we talked before, with no term limits. So.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I ran a test with my husband. I said, can you name the founding fathers? Can y'all name the founding fathers?
Some.
Do y'all know? I know. So that's. I mean, there's just little things like that, which is really interesting to me. And when I did a deep dive, I'm like, these guys were pretty cool. Yeah. Like, I mean, they were humans. I mean, we make them these deities almost, right? And in politics in general, on both sides of the aisle, we have deities of leaders, but no, they were human beings. They had flaws and was really battling to get things done.
Go to Monticello and see Thomas Jefferson, and you want to see what flaws are, because some of the story, and again, some of those stories, I think some of those things are a little bit.
Show on Thomas Jefferson.
Are a little bit about mythological.
There's some half,
like the amount of slaves and how many he commingled with. Who really is keeping? I mean, would I love to see it? But I think one of the problems is also it's a headline. Yeah. Everyone's trying to grab a headline. So the headline is Jefferson owned slaves, and what did he do with them? Not the whole story with the context. And wait
until I start talking about the black slave owners.
Well, God forbid.
Well, I mean, the key is...
Well, it's happening.
Yeah.
It will be happening.
Just like in society, there were slave owners across...
Everywhere. It was an industry.
The country. And not only just the U.S., obviously look around the
slave,
world.
The slave trade came here.
Right.
We didn't start it here. It came with the people that came to America.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Well,
okay.
yeah, let's,
I feel like
if
we have
you
a minute
saw
left.
the people who started it, we would have a different
I
discussion.
feel like that one, we'll save that for you and your show.
Yeah,
all right. So with the last, what do we got? A couple
30
minutes?
seconds. Yeah.
Okay. So give us a sign off and get people ready for the show.
Yeah, well, thank y'all so much for just allowing me to kind of give this. I'm so welcoming everyone to come and listen to Let's Talk About It with Janelle King. The Rabbit Trails is what this will be called, as we go and do deep dives into the major topics and do it in a fun way. So join me.
Nick, anything from you from today?
That is it, my man. This was awesome.
Yeah, this was fantastic, Janelle. Hopefully, maybe you'll have Nick and I on, and we
will.
can. Yeah, we like to kind of cross pollinate back on your show and be able to keep the dialogue up. I think it's so important. That's just. Whether it's business, whether it's politics, that we do have that dialogue. We learn, we educate each other, and maybe we can, have our own opinion. So for the Marketing Madmen, you've been listening to us on Extra 106.3, and guess what? You are going to now be listening to Janelle King, and every Saturday, it's with Janelle King. So thanks again, and we'll talk to you guys next week. Awesome.